The testing chamber fell silent as Professor Vexenari announced the final examination. Around the circular amphitheater, students from across the galaxy shifted nervously in their specialized seating. The Zephyrians' scales rippled with anxiety. The crystalline beings' faceted bodies dimmed to worried amber, and even the normally confident Vorthan warriors seemed subdued. All except one. Thomas Wright sat in the human-designated chair, casually flipping through his data pad while munching on what appeared to be some sort of primitive Earth snack. The other students had been studying for weeks, some even months, preparing for the legendary Mind Maze examination. Thomas had arrived 3 days ago and spent most of his time exploring the campus food courts. The Mind Maze, Professor Vexenari's 6 arms gestured dramatically, has been the ultimate test of mental fortitude for over 3 centuries. It is a psychic labyrinth that adapts to your deepest fears, your greatest weaknesses, your most profound anxieties. Many species consider it the pinnacle of psychological warfare training. Kethara, a Zephyrian sitting near Thomas, leaned over with concern. Her translator rendered her hissing speech into standard galactic. Human Thomas, you seem unconcerned, do you not understand? The Mind Maze has driven students to permanent psychological trauma. The Vorthan Empire uses a simplified version to break enemy agents. Thomas looked up from his datapad, where he'd been solving what looked like a simple word puzzle. Oh, the fear maze thing. Yeah, sounds interesting. Kind of like those escape rooms back home, but mental. The crystalline being called Prism chimed in, their voice like wind through crystal caves. This is not a game, human Thomas. Last semester, a Vorthan cadet emerged speaking only in mathematical equations. The semester before, a Zephyrian honor student convinced herself she was made of water. Huh, Thomas said, genuinely curious. So it's like a psychological puzzle that adapts to mess with your head? That actually sounds pretty cool. Professor Vexenari's compound eyes focused on the human with interest. In her 40 years of teaching, she'd never seen such casual dismissal of the Mind Maze. Fear, respect, determination, even arrogance, but never this peculiar indifference. Very well, she announced. We shall begin with volunteer demonstrations. Who wishes to go first? The silence stretched until Thomas raised his hand. I'll give it a shot. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Even Professor Vexenari's antenna twitched in surprise. Human Thomas, she said carefully. Perhaps you should observe others first. Nah, I'm good. Besides, I'm curious how this thing works. Thomas stood up, stretching casually. Where do I plug in? Minutes later, Thomas lay in the neural interface chair, psychic dampeners positioned around his temples. The massive holographic display above showed his brain activity to the class, steady, almost relaxed patterns that made Professor Vexenari frown. Initiating Mind Maze sequence, she announced, beginning with standard fear protocols. The display shifted, showing a first-person view of Thomas's experience. He found himself in what appeared to be a dark, endless corridor lined with doors. Most students would hear whispers, see shadows, feel the weight of unseen terrors pressing against their minds. Thomas whistled appreciatively. Nice graphics, very atmospheric. He walked to the first door and opened it without hesitation. Inside, he found a twisted version of his childhood home, complete with shadow monsters lurking in the corners. Oh, classic childhood trauma setup, he said, sounding delighted. Let me guess. I'm supposed to be afraid of the dark? The monsters under the bed? He walked right up to one of the shadow creatures. You know, you'd be more effective if you weren't standing in such obvious, dramatic lighting. The shadow monster recoiled, clearly not expecting this reaction. In the observation chamber, the students watched in stunned silence. Kethara's scales had gone completely flat. He's critiquing it? Thomas continued through the maze with the enthusiasm of someone solving a particularly clever puzzle. When the maze conjured his greatest fears, he analyzed their psychological basis. When it tried to trap him in recursive loops of anxiety, he mapped out the logical inconsistencies. When it attempted to overwhelm him with existential dread, he started humming. The thing is, Thomas explained to what appeared to be a manifestation of cosmic insignificance. Humans have been scaring ourselves for entertainment for thousands of years. Horror movies, haunted houses, ghost stories around campfires. We've basically weaponized fear for fun. He paused at a junction where 3 paths led deeper into psychological torment. Now, if I were designing this maze, I'd make this path lead to social anxiety scenarios, that one to imposter syndrome, and the middle one. He studied the subtle environmental cues. Probably fear of failure mixed with childhood inadequacy issues. Let's try the middle one. Professor Vexnari watched the readings in amazement. Thomas's stress levels were actually decreasing as he progressed. More impossibly, he seemed to be enjoying himself. You see, Thomas continued his running commentary, the trick with psychological puzzles is that they follow patterns. Just like crosswords, once you understand the constructor's mindset, you can predict the solutions. He reached what should have been the maze's final chamber, where most students faced their ultimate terror and either overcame it or were psychologically broken by it. Instead, Thomas found himself in a vast library filled with every book ever written. Infinite knowledge, a voice boomed, but finite time. Choose wisely, for you can only read one book, and upon finishing it, you will forget everything else you've ever learned. Thomas looked around the library and grinned. Oh, this is clever. Classic paradox of choice combined with fear of intellectual loss. He walked to the nearest shelf and pulled out a book titled, How to Remember Everything. While reading this book, Did he just solve the unsolvable paradox? Prism whispered. The maze collapsed. Thomas opened his eyes in the interface chair, looking refreshed rather than traumatized. That was fun. Does it have different difficulty levels? Professor R. Vexnari stared at her readings. Not only had Thomas completed the maze in record time, but the maze's adaptive AI had essentially given up trying to frighten him. The final diagnostic showed something unprecedented. The maze had been more stressed than the human. How? She asked simply. Thomas sat up, shrugging. I guess when you grow up doing crossword puzzles every Sunday morning, you learn that every puzzle has rules. And once you figure out the rules, it's just a matter of working through the logic. He grinned. Plus, humans are really weird about fear. We seek it out, analyze it, turn it into entertainment. Hard to be scared of something when you're busy figuring out how it works. As Thomas collected his things, the other students remained, silent, processing what they'd witnessed. The legendary mind maze, terror of students across the galaxy, had been treated like a casual weekend puzzle by a human who seemed genuinely disappointed it wasn't harder. Professor Vexnari made a note in her files. Recommend significant upgrades to mind maze difficulty settings before next human enrollment period. Thomas paused at the chamber exit. Hey, Professor. If you need help debugging that maze, I know a few people back on Earth who design escape rooms. They might have some ideas for making it more challenging. And with that, he wandered off to find lunch, leaving behind a classroom full of students who would never look at psychological warfare training the same way again.